daily lives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Neuro Drop-In in Lancaster provides a unique support network for those affected with neurological conditions, but my constituent who travels there by bus is a wheelchair user, and that means that when he gets on the bus at Fareham to travel to Torres home, if there is already another wheelchair user on the bus, he is unable to board the bus. Does the Minister think that's fair?
Minister.
I don't think that sounds terribly fair at all, and I'm very interested about what she shares with the House. And of course we have Transport Ministers today answering questions here at Equality, so I'm very happy for us to look at that issue for the Honourable Lady, and if she wants to write into me, I'll see that that's looked at.
Thank you
very much, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the Tory cost of living crisis, Sense have found that a large proportion of disabled people won't be seeing family, buying presents or even celebrating Christmas this year. Yet this government are ploughing ahead with changes that will ramp up sanctions, could remove NHS prescriptions and access to legal aid for disabled people. Why every single opportunity do they hit people with disabilities the hardest?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, apologies. I think the Transport Minister thought about might be on the bus because they're not coming today, and my fault. So I will pick that up in my further responses. I think the Honourable Lady will know that today we're making cost of living payments once again to support people in need. And in fact, that totals over £104 billion. Now, if the Honourable Lady is concerned, and rightly so for her constituents, then she should definitely direct them to Help for Households, the benefits calculator on .gov.uk, and also the help to claim process. There's also the Household Support Fund, which is around £1 billion for this year. So I hope the Honourable Lady is satisfied that we are absolutely supporting the most vulnerable.
Minister Ashton-Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The disability pay gap has risen under the Conservatives from 11.7% in 2014 to 13.8% in 2021. Now, Labour will act to close the gap and to support disabled people by introducing disability pay gap reporting for large employers. It's good for disabled people, it's good for business, and it's good for our economy. So why won't the government follow suit?
Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, we're absolutely committed to supporting disabled people, and frankly we're very proud of our record. We have supported more than 1 million disabled people into work, hitting the target 5 years early, and we are rewiring our benefit system to give a renewed focus on what people can do rather than what they cannot, so that those opportunities to improve their lives and get the pay they want through their employment is absolutely there.
Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, disabled people are also being hit hard by the Conservative cost of living crisis, which my honourable friend has already referred to. But you see, on average, the extra cost of disability is equivalent of 63% of household income before housing costs. So I would ask the Minister what discussions she has had with the Minister for Disabled People over this important issue. But Mr. Speaker, there is no Minister for Disabled People. Will the Minister tell the House when one will be appointed?
I thank the Honourable Lady for raising the point, and I think our goal, as she rightly says, and we should all have, is to reduce the disability employment gap, and that goal remains. In terms of her question for the House, of course, I'm disappointed because I'm the lead on GO orals. I'm disappointed I'm not enough for her today, but I do lead on the matters for the department. And I will be clear, Mr. Speaker, all DWP ministers take responsibility across our portfolios to support barriers to progress. And the process for ministerial appointments will be updated in the usual way.
The committee, Caroline Notes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly I would like to reassure my honourable friend she's more than enough for me. But can I specifically ask her, there was a really worrying article in the Times a few days ago talking about the invisibility of disabled people when it comes to making employment applications. We know that disabled people are less likely to be in work and they're less likely to take up opportunities for entrepreneurship. Perhaps my honourable friend can highlight the important work she's doing as the Minister for Social Mobility to make sure across government there is a real drive to help disabled people get the best opportunities to work.
No, I thank my right honourable friend, and I thank honourable members for their interest in this area. And I'm taking leadership directly as the Minister responsible for social mobility for access to employment, particularly around applications and recruitment, which suits disabled people to get into work. Because if we don't get them into work, then they cannot progress. And that's why we've got billions of pounds in our Back to Work plan, also supporting vulnerable people by uprating benefits by 6.7% in April equally. Is that me again? Yes. Hello again, Mr. Speaker. The Disability Action Plan's accessible 12-week consultation closed on the 6th of October. Since then, officials have been carefully considering all the consultation responses. Officials have been working closely with other government departments, and we have led discussions with the cross-government ministerial disability champions before we publish the final Disability Action Plan.
Mr. Speaker, 14 million people live with a disability, and they're statistically less likely to have a job or any qualifications or own their own home, and sadly their children are twice as likely to become victims of crime. Will the Minister ensure that the Disability Action Plan addresses all of these issues?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his typical care in this area, and I assure him and the House that significant work across government in these areas where disabled people have told us their outcomes must be a priority, whether it's education, employment or care. We are focused on that. Why the Disability Action Plan will complement this work. We're using the insight from the 12-week consultation to deliver real improvements in all the areas that matter most to disabled people to improve those daily lives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1.4 million people in the UK are living with a brain injury. Will she make sure that the final version of the plan lays out precisely what they intend to do in relation to people who have had a brain injury? Because the good news is that with really good neurorehabilitation, people can be given back not just their life, but a real quality of life. And we owe that to them, don't we?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. My father lived with a brain injury for over 25 years, and my annual Christmas card this year is with Headway Sussex and through their art therapy work. So I can assure the honourable gentleman, thinking about the impacts of brain injury is something that I do in DWP on a daily basis, and I thank you for raising that.
Blackman.
Before, Mr. Speaker.
Seriously.
Mr. Speaker, it is crucial the international community recognises the atrocities committed by Hamas and that they are held to account for their barbarism. That is why we are engaging with partners, including the UN, to ensure perpetrators are held to account for their depravity. The UK remains a global leader in eradicating sex-based violence. PCVI, our Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflicts initiative, has £60 million funding to combat conflict-related sexual violence and ensure survivors access redress and support. And on the 28th of November, we announced a further £33 million to support grassroots women's rights organisations tackling sex-based violence.
Blackman.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. Hostages that have been released report that Hamas atrocities meant that they were in captivity. They were subjected to physical and sexual violence. The Israeli Health Service also report that hostages have been drugged to make them look happy on videos. Will my right honourable friend join me in condemning Hamas for doing this and demanding that the International Red Cross have access to every single one of the hostages immediately?
Mr. Speaker, I share my honourable friend's horror. It is extremely distressing to hear all of those reports, and I do unequivocally condemn the reports of sexual violence which we are seeing. We continue to engage regularly with partners, including the UN. I will pick up the points that he has raised directly with the Foreign Office to see whether we can do what he asks. It sounds like something that does need the Red Cross, but we will make sure that we coordinate across government for a dedicated response on this issue.
UN Human Rights Council to raise the issue of gender-based violence on October the 7th and secure a clear condemnation from members of the rape, murder and torture perpetuated against women by Hamas on 7th of October?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Yes, we will. We have raised the reports of the 7th of October sexual violence attacks with UN Women and with the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict. And I will make sure that we continue to do this and to press upon international organisations that the whole world needs to respond to this.
Patrick Grady.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are having cross-governmental discussions around AI, and we are very clear that AI systems should not undermine people's rights or discriminate unfairly. This was a key topic of discussion at the AI Safety Summit and remains a priority for this government. Fairness is a core principle of our AI regulatory framework, and UK regulators are already taking action to address AI-related bias and discrimination.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On that case, is he aware of findings by the Institute for the Future of Work that the use of artificial intelligence presents risks to equality, potentially embedding bias and discrimination, and that auditing AI tools used in recruitment are often inadequate in ensuring compliance with equality law, good governance and best practice? What steps are being taken across the whole of government to ensure that appropriate assessments are made of the equalities impact of the use of AI in the workplace?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly why we had the AI Safety Summit, with over 28 countries plus the EU signing up to the Bletchley Declaration. And in March, we published the AI Regulation White Paper, which set out our first steps towards establishing a regulatory framework for AI. But I repeat, AI systems should not undermine people's rights or discriminate unfairly. That's why it's one of the core principles set out through the White Paper.
SNP spokesperson Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The risk of perpetuating inequality, the problems that arise in relation to solely automated decision-making are well accepted, both in recruitment and we've heard earlier about the challenges for disabled people in terms of access to employment, but also in other contexts such as immigration or welfare benefits. But the UK Government's Data Protection and Digital Information Bill is liberalising the use of artificial intelligence in decision-making and reducing the rights of people to appeal these decisions. Does he understand that it's increasingly important to make sure that we do mitigate risks such as encoded bias, and what is the specific plan to do that?
Minister. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't recognise the honourable member's assessment, but let me say this: context matters. The risks of bias will vary depending on the specific way in which AI is being used. That's why we're letting the regulators describe and illustrate what fairness means within their sectors, because they'll be able to apply greater context to their discussions. The risk of discrimination should be assessed in context, and guidance should be issued specific to the sector. And that's why we're preparing and publishing that guidance to support the regulators, and then we're going to encourage and support them to develop joint guidance, and we'll be working with the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the Information Commissioner's Office, working with the Employment Agency standards.
Paul Howell.
Question 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will take questions 6 and 14 together. This government is committed to boosting economic growth across the UK and ensuring opportunity is spread as widely as possible. Education is the most significant lever to create opportunity and reduce inequality, and I'm pleased that Conservative reforms have seen children in schools in England excel in the 2022 PISA scores. England significantly outperformed the average, rising from 27th for maths in 2009 to 11th this year, and ranked 25th for reading in 2009 and is now 13th this year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to economic equality, physical mobility is a critical part. As the Minister may know, I'm the joint chair of the APPG for Left Behind Neighbourhoods. In our recent report, we talked about how limited public transport connectivity frustrates access to education and employment. I have constituents in places like Trimble and Fishburn that can't get to 10,000 jobs in Aycliffe, only 10 miles away. Would the Minister agree with me that it's imperative that when funding is determined for local transport, the opportunity to enhance social mobility is absolutely critical?
Mr. Speaker, I do agree with him, and he raises a very important point about how connectivity creates access and then generates social mobility. I know that DFT is working to put the needs of current and potential users at the heart of the operation of the transport system. I also know that Network North, our new £36 billion plan, will improve our country's transport. I'd like him, if he would write to me specifically, because I think some of these duties will fall to his local council, and I want to know what they are doing with the money we're giving them in order to improve access.
David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This Conservative government has done more for the people of Blythe Valley than any other government. And has brought much needed investment and employment opportunities for my constituents.
Please, I can't hear the question. Obviously, there must be something funny. I didn't hear it. Come on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Conservative government has done more for the people of Blythe Valley than any other government, and has brought much needed investment and employment and opportunities for my constituents following years and decades of Labour neglect. Will my right honourable friend please assure me that continuing to close the gap between the North and the South remains this government's highest priority?
Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to assure him of that. My honourable friend is an effective advocate for his constituency, and he knows that this government has been investing in Blythe Valley. We've given £18 million boost to regenerate housing. We've given £1.5 million for new high-tech training equipment, £200,000 for extended CCTV provision, and a further £20 million through our long-term plan for towns. Our investment in Blythe shows that only the Conservatives can deliver for them, and levelling up and closing the gap is a priority for this government.
Of children in Newcastle Central are growing up in poverty. 17% of households are in fuel poverty, and a fifth of adults are estimated to be in problematic debt. Does the Minister agree that a government that cannot deliver on economic prosperity for working people in the North East is a government that cannot deliver on socio-economic equality?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, this government is delivering. Of course we recognise that there are people who are in need, and that is why we are doing everything across all departments to deliver for them. For example, our Supporting Family programme has funded local areas to help almost 600,000 families with multiple and complex needs to make significant positive changes to their lives. The programme is working. Evaluation found the proportion of children on the programme going into care reduced by a third, adults receiving custodial sentences decreased by a quarter. There is so much that we can say, Mr. Speaker. I know we're running out of time, but if she would like me to write to her, I can...
Tag Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One thing that can mitigate against socio-economic equality, particularly for the elderly and the most vulnerable, is the access to care staff. Now, the rate of remuneration is 61p per mile, going down to 25p per mile after the first 3,500 miles. Mr. Speaker, these figures have not been revised upwards since 2011. And this means that these wonderful people in my constituency are very often losing money travelling about. It doesn't do much for recruitment either. So, Mr. Speaker, would the Minister agree to talk to the Treasury and the Scottish Government about doing something about this?
Why mistake?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure colleagues in the appropriate department have heard the honourable gentleman's question and will be able to provide a more detailed response.
We now come to Topital Stephen Bonner.
Or one, please.
Mr. Speaker, at my last topical statement, I spoke about the unacceptable rise in anti-Semitism and hostility towards the Jewish community since the 7th of October, and I'm updating the House on what further action I can take to promote social cohesion. The Equality Act is a shield against discrimination, and the public sector equality duty is a part of that shield. It is particularly important that all public authorities take the duty seriously. So to ensure that they understand how to comply with the duty, I will be publishing updated guidance shortly, and I will then write to leaders of public authorities that have a key role in promoting social cohesion to show how they can foster good relations, promote equality of opportunity, and eliminate unlawful discrimination.
I thank the Secretary of State for her answer. As the Women's Budget Group has rightly pointed out, women are more reliant on benefits due to caregiving roles, and they have been disproportionately impacted by regressive social security changes since 2010. So what consideration has the Minister given to the abolition of the poverty-inducing benefit cap and the hated two-child limit to prevent further poverty and destitution amongst women and children, and will she raise this matter with her Cabinet colleagues?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman will know that we disagree with those propositions which he has put. We have said so time and time again at this dispatch box. The two-child policy is something that we believe is important. We know that there is a cost of living crisis caused by rising energy costs, war in Ukraine caused by Russia. These are things that we are doing everything we can as a government to make sure that the impact on households is limited.
Well,
A Museum of London report bizarrely concluded that black people were more likely to die of medieval plague. will the Minister for Women and Equalities ensure that such sensationalist research findings and woke archaeology have no impact at all on current health and pandemic policy?
Mr. Speaker, I do agree. I'm not even sure whether we can call it just sensationalist or woke. The research apparently was based on phrenology, completely discredited type of science. And I do agree with him that this type of research is damaging. It's damaging to trust, to social cohesion, to and trust in health services even. And I've written to the director of the Museum of London expressing my concerns.
Minister Urbano Pongresari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2020, women's life expectancy in the poorest parts of the UK was almost 19 years shorter than those in the most affluent. 13 years ago, Labour introduced socio-economic duty in the Equality Act to make the NHS and other public bodies tackle this gap. Why have ministers failed to implement it?
Mr. Speaker, the socio-economic duty the Honourable Lady references is right, is not commenced in England. It is, however, commenced in Scotland, where the figures are worse, and that shows that that is not the solution to the problems which she's raising.
Elaine Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My North Devon constituency is in the lower quartile for social mobility. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to improve social mobility outcomes for remote, rural and coastal communities?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with my honourable friend that circumstances of a person's birth or where they live should not be a barrier to social mobility, and that's why we have established things like the Social Mobility Pledge Consortium with businesses. 120 of them have signed up. There are 12 Community Renewal Fund projects serving her constituency and the wider area, and of course £1.2 million from the Shared Prosperity Fund achieving those aims.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Eccleston Review was published 5 months ago, and we're due to have a statement later today. Can I seek assurances from the Secretary of State that her department will work with the Ministry of Defence to ensure its recommendations are published at pace?
Well, I completely agree with the Honourable Lady. It was a very important review. I'm glad that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, made an apology at this dispatch box. There will be a statement later on, and I suggest that she asks questions of the Minister at that point.
Richard Fuller.
Every year, 800 women pass through immigration detention, including centres such as Yarlswood in my constituency. Many of these women have been trafficked or are victims of sexual abuse. I'm working with the group Women for Refugee Women to provide a snapshot of the backgrounds of these women. Will the Minister agree to meet with us to analyse the results of their finding?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. Of course I would be happy to meet with him. Women who have survived trafficking or sexual abuse are detained only when the evidence of vulnerability in their individual case is outweighed by immigration removal considerations. Victims of torture have their case considered by a single specialist team, autonomous of general caseworkers, and victims of modern slavery undergo a needs assessment to identify recovery needs.
Mr. Speaker, gender bias plays a key role in the misdiagnosis and underdiagnosis of conditions such as ADHD and autism in women and girls. So what action is the government taking to make sure that every girl with special educational needs receives the support in school or college that she is entitled to by law?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're working with the 42 ICBs around the country to improve the timelines for diagnosis for autism and ADHD. Some ICBs are doing particularly well, others need a lot more help and support.
Many people with impaired mobility conditions depend on their cars for the freedom to live the lives they want to lead. So will the government crack down on Labour anti-car policies in local government, like unit expansion, LTNs and building over station car parks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is clear in its condemnation of Labour's attack on motorists, whether it's in London or Wales. That is why, in the summer, the Prime Minister ordered a review of low-traffic neighbourhoods, which are making some parts of London inaccessible for disabled people, whether they're using public transport or cars.
Kenny Caskell, final question.
Single Sex has disclosed that police forces are still failing to adequately record the sex of an offender at birth, sometimes recording self-identification. This can have considerable effect upon criminal justice data. will the Minister take any steps to ensure that the correct data is given so that appropriate analysis can be given and we don't have skewed information?
Yes, that is something that my department is working on. He's absolutely right that we need to make sure that data is accurate, people understand what is being recorded, and that this doesn't have an impact on how public services are delivered. And if he has any further information which he would like to share, I'd very much like to see if there's specific constituency circumstances we can look into.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Mike Kane.
Welcome back, number one, sir. Mr. Speaker. As the last Prime Minister question before recess, I know the whole House will want to join me in wishing you and all the House staff a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I know members will also want to join me in sending our warmest wishes to our armed forces, both at home and stationed overseas, and our emergency services and all those who will be working over Christmas too. And finally, I know everyone will want to join me in wishing Mark Drakeford all the best as he moves on from his many, many years of devoted public service. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Can I concur with the comments of the Prime Minister about our armed forces, Christmas and Mark Drakeford? My constituent, Mr. Speaker, Fred Bates, is 74, he has liver cancer and he's a victim of the contaminated blood products scandal. The Prime Minister had a chance to do right by Fred last week, but failed to do so and lost the vote in this House. After half a century, Fred wishes to know when he and fellow survivors will be compensated and get justice.
Now, Mr. Speaker, this was an appalling tragedy, and my thoughts remain with all those concerned. I absolutely understand the strength of feeling on this. It was this government previously who set up the inquiry, which I participated in, and we fully understand the need for action. The government has crucially already accepted the moral case for compensation and acknowledged that justice does need to be delivered for the victims. My right honourable friend, the Minister for the Cabinet Office, will update the House on our next steps on the infected blood inquiry shortly.
Rexman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tax cuts in the autumn statement were extremely welcome. But in order to go further and to get the tax burden as low as it possibly can be, accurate and robust economic modelling is required. The Office of Budget Responsibility have been habitually wrong, and we had the spectacle last week of the head of the OBR saying that his latest forecast might be 30 billion out. So will my right honourable friend commit to finding a better system of financial modelling so we can get taxes lower?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, the OBR has brought greater transparency and independence to the forecasting on which government policy is based. But he's right, and it is required to produce an assessment of its accuracy of its fiscal and economic forecasts at least once a year. But crucially, as he acknowledged, thanks to our management of the economy, the fact that we have halved inflation, controlled borrowing, we now have delivered the largest tax cuts in a generation, Mr. Speaker, and they will benefit families up and down the country from January.
Welcome the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday we heard of the tragic death of a young man on the Bibby Stockholm. I know the whole House will want to send our deepest condolences to his family and friends. We must never let this happen again. I would also like to mark the retirement of my colleague and friend, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. Mark committed his life to public service and lives his values every day. Quietly and patiently, Mark has been a titan of Labour and Welsh politics, and we thank him for his service and wish him well. Mr. Speaker, Christmas is a time of peace on earth and goodwill to all. Has anyone told the Tory party?
Mr. Speaker, Christmas is also a time for families, and under the Conservatives we do have a record number of them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to this point, At the beginning of the year, I set out some priorities that this government would deliver for the British people. And over the course of this year, we have, Mr. Speaker, inflation halved, Mr. Speaker, the economy growing, debt falling, action on the longest waiters, the boats down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from Honourable Friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he's kicked the can down the road, but in the last week his MPs have said of him he's not capable enough, he's inexperienced, he's arrogant, a really bad politician. Well, they're shouting, this is what they said. So, well, come on. Who was it who said he's a really bad politician? Hands up. They're shouting. Well, what about inexperienced? Who was that? Or, and now there's got to be some hands for this, he's got to go. Oh, so, apparently he's holding a Christmas party next week.
Order! It's Christmas. No, but you might not want the Christmas present that I could give you. So please, Keir Starmer.
Apparently he's holding a Christmas party next week. How's the invite list looking?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for all the comments. What I would say to him, he should hear what they have to say about him, Mr. Speaker.
Right. Do you want to be the first one? Because it is Christmas and I'm going to hear it. My constituents are going to have a Christmas like everyone else. They want to know how their Christmas is going to be affected. So want less of it from all sides. Keir Starmer.
They've obviously found the donkey for their nativity. The search of three wise men may take a little longer. But while they fight amongst themselves, there's a country out here that isn't being governed, where more than 100,000 people are paying hundreds more a month on their mortgages, energy bills going back up in January, the economy shrinking again, NHS waiting lists an all-time high. Doesn't he think the government would be better off fixing the messes they've already made rather than scrambling to create new ones?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about governing and spent the first two questions talking about political tittle-tattle, Mr. Speaker. What a joke. Well, let's get on to the substance, Mr. Speaker. Let's get on to the substance. He mentioned the things. What is the news that we've just heard in the last week? Well, what's the most important thing? The most important thing is education, Mr. Speaker, because that's how we spread opportunity in our country. And what have we learned? Where are the schools performing best in the United Kingdom? In England, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the reforms of this Conservative government, rising up the league tables, giving our kids the start they need. And where are they plummeting down? In Labour-run Wales.
He talks about children. Nearly 140,000 children are going to be homeless this Christmas. That is more than ever before. That's a shocking state of affairs, and it should shame this government. Instead of more social housing, house building is set to collapse. Instead of banning no-fault evictions, thousands of families are at risk of homelessness. Rather than indulging his backbenchers swanning around in their factions and their star chambers, pretending to be members of the mafia, when's he going to get a grip and focus on the country?
Let's just look at the facts. Let's look at the facts, actually, because rough sleeping in this country is down by 35%, Mr. Speaker, since its peak, thanks to the efforts of this government. There are hundreds of thousands of fewer children in poverty today, thanks to this government, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to home building, again, what is he doing? We just had the data this last week. In the last year, an almost record number of new homes delivered, Mr. Speaker, more than in any year of the last Labour government.
140,000 children homeless this Christmas, and he's utterly tone deaf. And the rise in homelessness shows how these Tory crises merge and grow and damage the country. Families like the Bradys in Wiltshire, both parents working full-time with 2 young children, forced out of their home of 15 years by a no-fault eviction, now living in their van. Or 11-year-old Liam Walker, homeless this Christmas. He wrote a letter to Santa saying, "Please, can I have a forever home? I don't want any new toys. I just want all my old toys out of storage. I just want us to be happy again." Is there anything that could shame this government into putting the country first? Then it's surely this little boy.
Mr. Speaker, if he really cared about building homes... No. If he really cared about building homes, when there was an opportunity in this House, Mr. Speaker, in this House, to back our plans to reform defective EU laws, to unlock 100,000 new homes, Mr. Speaker, what did he do? What did he do? He went in front of the cameras and said one thing and came in here and blocked it. Typical shameless opportunism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He hasn't finished. As the world's...
One more.
Mr. Speaker, is that really his Christmas message to Liam? Cocooned in his party management breakfast. He just can't see the country.
Order. Mr. Cleverly, please. It's Christmas. I want a little bit of silence. And I'm going to get it one way or another. And that goes to each side. Keir Starmer.
Cocooned in his party management breakfast. He just can't see the country in front of him and what they've done. I'll finish by thanking hard-working families across Britain who kept our country going. It's been an impossibly difficult year for so many. I want to pay special tribute to our key workers, particularly those in the emergency services and those serving abroad in our forces, who, even at this time of year, are doing the vital work of protecting their country. I wish everyone, including the members opposite, a very happy and peaceful New Year. Will the Prime Minister join me?
Prime Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, he missed that I paid tribute to our emergency workers at the beginning of the session, Mr. Speaker. But let's see, because I think it is important, because he talked about working families. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I want to make sure that we support working families, and that's what we're actually delivering, Mr. Speaker, because all he has to offer them is borrowing £28 billion a year, which all it will do is push up their mortgage rates and push up their taxes. Meanwhile, what have we done? Delivered tax cuts for millions of working families, boosted the national living wage, Mr. Speaker, recruited 50,000 more nurses, 20,000 more police officers, improved our schools. We've cut the cost of net zero for those working families. We've cut the boat crossings by a third and we've halved inflation. And that's the difference, Mr. Speaker. We're getting on and delivering for working Britain.
Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the world struggles to agree the future of the 1.5 commitment, in Wimbledon we're keen to do our bit. So to help my campaign to make EV charging access more widespread, can I ask my right honourable friend for 2 early Christmas presents? Will he speak to our right honourable friend the Chancellor to ask him to look again at the unfair differential rates of VAT on public and private charging points? And will he ask our right honourable friend, the Levelling Up Secretary, to look at the bylaws that stop local councils making on-street parking and charging more accessible?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to tell my honourable friend that the Chancellor has already authorised over £2 billion of investment to support our transition to zero-emission vehicles, and we are well on track to reach 300,000 charge points by 2030. And I can also tell him that we will consult on amending the National Planning Policy Framework to make sure that it prioritises the rollout of charge points, on top of the funding of almost £400 million to support local authorities. Spread these out so all our families have access to them when they need.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister please share his Christmas message for children being bombed in Gaza this winter?
Prime Minister.
No. Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary. We urgently need more humanitarian pauses to get all the hostages out and to get life-saving aid into Gaza to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. And we have been consistent that we support what is a sustainable ceasefire, which means Hamas must stop launching rockets into Israel and release all the hostages.
Mr. Speaker, if the current actions of the Israeli government continue, then it is estimated that almost 1,400 more children will die between now and Christmas Day. Now, in the United Nations last night, our friends and allies in France, in Ireland, in Canada, in Spain and in Australia, they joined with 148 other nations to vote with courage, care and compassion for a ceasefire. The UK, they shamefully abstained. How can the Prime Minister possibly explain why 153 nations are wrong, yet Westminster is right?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said consistently, we're deeply concerned about the devastating impact of the fighting in Gaza on the civilian population. Too many people have lost their lives already, and this is something that we've stressed, and I've stressed personally to Prime Minister Netanyahu just last week. And what we are doing practically is to get more aid into Gaza, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary is appointing a UK humanitarian coordinator, and in my conversations last week with Prime Minister Netanyahu, I pressed him on opening up the Kerem Shalom crossing so that more aid can flow in, and we're actively exploring the opportunity for maritime corridors, something that the UK is well placed to lead, and I can give him my assurance that we will work night and day to get more aid to those who desperately need it.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We expect our young folk to remain in educational training until they are 18, but many lack transport to get there. With the amazing head teacher of Alston Moor Federation, Jill Jackson, I secured funding from the council to get her students to college and pressed the council for a £500,000 bursary scheme to extend youth travel more widely. But we shouldn't have to do this. To secure equality of opportunity and true levelling up, will the Prime Minister look to mandate and support councils to provide post-16 transport so all our young people in towns, cities and rural areas can reach their next stage in life?
My honourable friend and the head teacher of Alston Moor Federation, Jill Jackson, have done a fantastic job in securing more funding, and I wish her well also, I believe, on her upcoming retirement. As he knows, our school travel policy ensures that no child is prevented from accessing education by a lack of transport. Not only do we have home-to-school travel policies, but the 16 to 19 bursary fund can be used to support young people with transport costs, and more generally we're taking action to keep bus fares capped at £2, Mr. Speaker, but I'll happily make sure that my honourable friend gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss his proposals further.
Donaldson.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware of unionist concerns about the need to remove the Irish sea border created by the protocol, and that disrupts the UK's internal market. Will the Prime Minister bring forward legislation to amend the UK Internal Market Act and both guarantee and future-proof Northern Ireland's unfettered access to the UK's internal market in all scenarios?
Can I thank my right honourable friend? I recognise the need to do more in this area, and I can confirm to him that the government does stand ready to legislate to protect Northern Ireland's integral place in the United Kingdom and the UK internal market, alongside an agreement to restore the executive. We can do this at pace, and I know my right honourable friend and his colleagues are working hard to achieve that. Our NHS, our police officers and the most vulnerable in Northern Ireland need devolved government urgently, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to work day and night to help achieve that.
To Luke Evans.
121 MPs from across the House signed my open letter to supermarkets asking to have a Buy British button online. I'm pleased to announce that last week Morrisons were the first supermarket to implement a Buy British tab. That gives consumers the choice to have homegrown produce and also supports our farmers. So will the Prime Minister join my calls to ask other supermarkets to have the courage to make the change and follow suit?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this government will always back our farmers, and I welcome the work of my honourable friend and the National Farmers Union on this particular issue. We absolutely support calls for industry-led action on this topic. I welcome the news about the Buy British button at Morrison's, and I can tell my honourable friend that we will continue to encourage all retailers to do all they can to showcase the incredible food produced right here in the United Kingdom.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The marriage plans of thousands of couples were dashed last week by the sudden announcement of a big increase in the salary requirement for a spouse visa. Can the Prime Minister give any reassurance to those with very well advanced marriage plans which appear now to have been scuppered, and to families already in the UK who need to extend their stay who won't comply with the new rules? Can he at least offer some transitional help for families, or does his party's support for the family now only apply to the highly paid?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a long-standing principle that anyone bringing dependents to the UK must be able to support them financially. We should not expect this to be at the taxpayers' expense, and the threshold hasn't been raised in over a decade. It's right that we have now brought it in line with the median salary. The family immigration route, as he knows, does contain provision for exceptional circumstances, but more generally it's also right, and I can tell him, to look at transitional arrangements to ensure that they are fair, and the Home Office are actively looking at this and will set out further information shortly.
Olin Mumbycroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I make no apology for raising once again the issue of steel. As we are at serious risk now of losing the ability to make virgin steel here in the UK. I know the government are working hard on this, but it is a matter of national security, and we need the Prime Minister's leadership on this issue. What is he doing to ensure that we are able to make our own virgin steel and we don't lose it under his watch?
Mr. Speaker, can I praise my honourable friend's leadership for championing her local community, but also the steel industry in the UK, and she's right to do so, because it is an incredibly important part, not just of our local communities, but of our economy and security, and she is right to put this issue on the agenda. We are committed to working with the steel sector to secure a decarbonised future, supporting local economic growth and our levelling up agenda. That includes our commitment for major support with energy costs, but also access to hundreds of £millions of grants to support energy efficiency and decarbonisation. I obviously can't comment on conversations with individual companies, but you can see our track record in working with either Celsa or Tata Steel that we have been able to support our fantastic steel industry and will always continue to do so.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A road company has walked away from 13,000 tonnes of hazardous waste in Lancaster, and it's now been on fire for 10 days. There are plumes of smoke covering our city. Lancaster City Council has been left to pick up the tab, and to date they've spent £262,000. Without government support and intervention, this fire will burn for several months. So will the Prime Minister support my local council with swift government support?
Yeah. Can I thank the honourable member for raising this incredibly important question? I know she's been working alongside my honourable friend, the member for Morecambe, on this, and can I also thank the emergency services in her constituency. And my understanding is that Lancaster City Council, the Environment Agency and the UK HSA and emergency services are working together to ensure that the health risks and environmental consequences are minimised, but I will ensure that the relevant minister understands the absolute urgency of the issue that she's raised, and I'll make sure that she meets with them as soon as possible.
Jerome Mayo.
Mr. Speaker, some dental practices are taking advantage of post-COVID demand to take their NHS practices private, earning more money but leaving behind those most in need. Training a dentist costs constituents in Broadland more than £300,000. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that if a dentist accepts public funding in order to qualify, they should be asked to commit to NHS dentistry for a number of years before going private?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and we are investing £3 billion into dentistry. The dentistry contract with the NHS was reformed last year to improve access for patients, and around half of all treatment were delivered to non-paying adults and children. The number of adults as seen has gone up by 10%, the number of children by 15%. But my honourable friend is right, and more needs to be done, and that's why the government will be bringing forward the dentistry recovery plan in due course.
Well, I should have called over.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 12 days until Christmas, and hundreds of families in Battersea will be worried. Not about being able to buy gifts for children, but whether they can afford food and heat for their homes due to the Tories' cost of living crisis. Over 4,300 emergency food supplies were provided in Battersea by the Wandsworth Food Bank this year, and they have told me that they are bracing for the worst winter yet. So what is the Prime Minister doing to ensure families do not go cold and hungry this Christmas?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we care deeply about making sure those who are most vulnerable in our society get the support that they need through the winter. That's why we increased welfare by record amounts earlier this year. We supplemented that with cost of living payments of £900 for the most vulnerable. It's why we supported those with energy bills who need our help the most. Pensioners in her constituency and elsewhere will receive up to £300 alongside their winter fuel payment. And indeed, that support lasts not just through the winter, but into next year, because we're deeply committed to helping those who need it, and this government has got a track record of delivering that help.
Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is rightly focused on taking long-term decisions to improve the lives of people in this country. So can I make a suggestion? Our mental health legislation is 40 years old, and we made a manifesto commitment in 2017 and 2019 to reform the Mental Health Act, because we have people with learning disabilities and autism sectioned under the Act being kept an inappropriate accommodation for long periods. We have people sectioned under that Act not receiving the compassionate care that they deserve and, in a sense, are criminalised. And we have people sectioned under that Act who have their mental health condition re-stigmatised by the act of sectioning. So, would the Prime Minister, in the absence of a bill in the King's Speech, would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and other like-minded colleagues to discuss how we might be able to take forward reform of the Mental Health Act, because it simply isn't fit for the 21st century?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue. He's absolutely right about the work that needs to be done, and I'm grateful to the Joint Committee on the draft Mental Health Bill, and our intention is, when parliamentary time allows, to bring forward a bill. I'd be happy to meet with him and colleagues to discuss this, but also just remind everyone that we are undertaking the largest expansion of mental health services in a generation, £2.3 billion of extra funding by March of next year, increasing capital investment in mental health urgent care centres, and, under the long-term workforce plan, the largest expansion of the mental health workforce that we've ever seen in this country.
Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rather than the headline chaos of a government that is dominating the media, much more important to the public, business and organisations is their deeply unsatisfactory day-to-day experience in engaging with this dysfunctional administration. As far as they can see, Britain isn't working. When's he going to get a grip?
Mr. Speaker, the most pressing issue facing families is the cost of living, which is why this government has delivered what it said, which was to halve inflation, Mr. Speaker. Not just that, we are supplementing that with significant tax cuts benefiting working families from January, £450 for a typical person in work, demonstrating that we are absolutely on the side of hard-working families, and this government is cutting their taxes.
Mr. Speaker, breast cancer survival rates have improved, but we need to go further on harder-to-reach cancers. There is a drop-in in Parliament this afternoon on lobular breast cancer and the research we need. Could my right honourable friend or his excellent new Secretary of State for Health find time in their busy diaries to join us?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for the work that he does on this specific and important issue. I'm happy to tell him the Health Secretary, I believe, is attending this afternoon's event to hear more about its work, and I can assure him that we're focused on fighting cancer on all fronts: prevention, diagnosis, treatment, research and funding. We are making good progress, but there's always more we can do, and I look forward to hearing from him after this afternoon's event.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While Home Secretary was in Rwanda signing his new treaty, his department put out a contract to manage small boat arrivals until 2030 at a £700 million cost to the taxpayer. Doesn't this show that even the Home Office doesn't think the Minister's plan will work?
No, it's a total mischaracterisation, Mr. Speaker, of what was put out, which was an advert, not a commitment. But what I can say to the Honourable Lady, I'm glad that she now cares about this issue, not something that we've seen previously from the side opposite, but our track record is clear. We've got the numbers of small boat arrivals down this year by over a third, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're doing about it. The party opposite voting against every measure that we've taken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I chair the caucus of 38 Conservative members of Parliament who have Britain's longest river flowing through their constituencies, and we presented a business case to the Chancellor for £500 million to try to manage this river holistically. Our constituencies are now facing flooding every year with the damage that causes our businesses and our communities. And this evening I have an adjournment debate on flooding of the River Severn. Will the Prime Minister take an interest, because the business case shows a GVA uplift for the West Midlands of over £100 billion if we can manage and tame Britain's longest river?
Can I thank my honourable friend for raising this? I do recall he and I spoke about this when I was Chancellor, and I praise him for the work and his leadership on this issue in his local area. I'll make sure the Chancellor does look at the business case, and he will know that we have a significantly increased funding for flood defences to over £5 billion, protecting hundreds of thousands more homes. But if this is an interesting opportunity for the Chancellor to look at it, I'm sure he'll take that up.
Christopher Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what's worse? Losing your WhatsApp messages as a tech bro, losing £11.8 billion to fraud as Chancellor, presiding over the biggest fall in living standards in our history, or desperately clinging on to power when you become even more unpopular than Boris Johnson?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, what matters to me is delivering for the British people, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Final Theresa Villiers.
Given the appalling reports of sexual violence committed by Hamas on the 7th of October and the risk that hostages could have this treatment inflicted on them as well, will he raise this issue in international fora so the international community demands strongly humanitarian access to hostages in Gaza?
Mr. Speaker, the reports of sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas are deeply shocking. We've raised our concerns with the United Nations a fortnight or so ago, and we are engaging with the Israeli government to consider what further support we can take. And more broadly, we continue to do everything that we can to ensure that all hostages can return safely to their families, including those British hostages and those with links to the UK. And she can rest assured that I and the Foreign Secretary are working tirelessly to bring about their safe return.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We now come to the first statement. Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to set out the Government's formal response to Lord Etherton's LGBT Veterans Independent Review. The treatment of those armed forces personnel perceived to be LGBT between 1967 and 2000 has long been a stain on the conscience of the nation. Last year, this Government asked Lord Etherton to conduct a review into the impact of the historic ban on homosexuality in defence. Following the call for evidence, the inquiry received 1,128 responses. They came from those who were dismissed or discharged because of their sexual orientation. They came from those who, because of the ban, felt compelled to resign, purchase their release from service, or curtail their contracts. And they came from those who, whilst not part of the LGBT community, witnessed the trauma of such antediluvian rules as family members, as colleagues, as friends. Etherton paints an unflinching picture of the most shocking treatment of gay members of our defence community by an institutionally homophobic organisation. Mr. Speaker, out of the blue, when applying to be a reservist in 1980, I was asked if I was gay. Even then, that struck me as hugely inappropriate. But that strong sense of impropriety that has stayed with me for 43 years pales into insignificance against the wall of hurt experienced by LGBT people in the course of their defence journey, much of it evidenced by Terence Etherton. Different members of the community have, of course, been impacted differently. Yet for each and every one, the repercussions were enduring, with tentacles reaching into all dimensions of their lives since. Sadly, we cannot turn the clock back. But we can apologise for decades of hurt. That is what the Prime Minister did after Lord Etherton published his report in July. And that is what the Defence Secretary and Service Chiefs have done in their turn. However, apologies are not enough. Etherton demands more, and we agree. That's why, even before the report was published, the government took steps to right historic wrongs. In 2021, we began handing back medals to anyone who had had them withheld or removed because of their sexuality. Medals matter. They should never have been snatched away. In December 2021, we removed the barriers that prevented those living with HIV from joining the military. And back in June, the Home Office extended its disregard and pardon scheme, wiping historic convictions for same-sex sexual activity. The extension was especially important for veterans because it broadened the eligibility to include any same-sex conviction that wouldn't be a crime today, thereby covering service disciplinary offences. In addition, we published guidance helping to make LGBT veterans aware of things they might not have felt they were entitled to. This includes information on mental and physical health support, as well as benefits that all veterans are able to receive. Not to mention the Armed Forces Veterans Badge, which I handed out to a number of veterans at this year's Pride event in London. However, today we go further still. And I can announce we are accepting the intent behind all 49 of Lord Etherton's recommendations. In fact, to date, we have already implemented almost half of them. We have established a legacy website to host the review, the government response and information collected by the review, including testimonies. And through Op Courage, we are ensuring a focus on the non-combat mental health impacts of the ban. Significantly, in some instances, we have actually gone above and beyond the review recommendations. For example, Etherton advised making certain restorative measures available for the next of kin of deceased veterans. But we have created a broader definition of next of kin, namely persons of sufficient interest, recognising the impact the ban may have had on LGBT veterans' relationships and ensuring that those they would have nominated as next of kin are seen as such. Next year, we will see the expanded rollout of the Armed Forces Veterans Card to all veterans who served in the UK Armed Forces before 2018. And plans for a Veterans Memorial at the National Memorial Arboretum are now underway. Today, we are throwing open the front door to our LGBT veterans. Today, we ask them to apply or register an interest for restorative measures that are relevant to them, individual apology letters, return of berets and cap badges, amendments to veterans' service history, addition of more personal testimony to evidence collected by the review. Testimony which will eventually become part of the historic record in the National Archive, signalling that our LGBT veterans will never be forgotten, signalling that 33 years of national shame will never be expunged, affirming and celebrating their part in our country's history. I would strongly urge colleagues across the House to encourage LGBT constituents to come forward, read the online guide, and complete the application form for restorative measures. Importantly, the form will also allow veterans to indicate their interest in applying for a financial award when eligibility is confirmed and that scheme goes live. Lord Etherton recommended an appropriate award should be made to affected veterans, with the government's overall exposure capped at 50 million. We have agreed to this in full. But in order to develop the scheme, we will first need to gain a much better understanding of what the affected cohort looks like. Hence calling for veterans to indicate their interest on the form that goes live today. That data will help officials and the community working together to design a fair and equitable scheme for distributing the funds Lord Etherton has called for and that we accept. There will be an opportunity for a full debate in the new year once the financial award scheme is matured, with the benefit of the data captured through the front door that I am opening today. Mr. Speaker, I want to place on the record my gratitude once more to Lord Etherton and his team for their outstanding work compiling a comprehensive and deeply affecting report. I want to thank Fighting with Pride and our working group, including trusted stakeholders and independent LGBT veterans, who not only made sure their voices were heard, but helped steer our response throughout. Now, they will not seek it, but can I mark out Craig Jones and Caroline Page in particular for their part in bringing us to where we are today. Above all, I want to pay tribute to all those who came forward in the first place. Veterans who showed tremendous courage in chronicling traumatic experiences, which for many have been suppressed, causing grief and groundless silent shame for decades. Today's defence has come a long way since 2000. We cannot change the past, but we can make the future better. In accepting Lord Etherton's recommendations, we salute a slighted generation and ensure its successors can hold their heads high in a place that wants them, values them, honours them. Mr. Speaker, I am today placing a copy of the government's response in the library, and I commend the statement to the House.
Now come to Shadow Secretary of State John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the early sight of his statement. With due respect to the Minister, and he is a diligent Minister, this statement should have been made by the Defence Secretary. The last one was. And this no-show from the Defence Secretary downgrades the importance the government gives to backing up the Prime Minister's apology to LGBT plus veterans in July. Crucially, it undermines the confidence LGBT veterans will have that the government is serious in fully implementing the Etherton Review and fully righting the injustices from the ban on LGBT people serving in our armed forces until 2000. Mr. Speaker, this is unfinished business for Labour. We lifted the ban in 2000. We argued for the Etherton Review in the Armed Forces Bill. We welcomed its publication and recommendations. We again thank Lord Etherton for his review and the inclusive way in which he conducted it. At the heart of the review were statements from those who were victims of the overt, often brutal, homophobic policy. We paid tribute to them for sharing their experiences and giving their testimonies. And I also pay tribute, like the Minister, to groups like Fighting with Pride, who've campaigned for justice, along with backing from wider veterans' organisations like the Royal British Legion and Help for Heroes. This is a cause that unites the House. And the last Defence Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Wyre and Preston North, in what was a very powerful and moving statement in July, said, "I have decided specifically that a debate in the House should take place to make sure the House properly debates the report and the government's response to it, not just the compensation scheme as the Minister this afternoon has implied. So will the government honour in full this promise to the House? When will this debate be? And just to be clear, this debate is of profound importance to veterans. It should be a watershed moment for defence to move beyond the long, shameful shadow of the past. To say in future, we are deeply proud of our LGBT veterans. We honour your service to our nation. You are part of us. The previous Defence Secretary also said, we will be very happy to work with the opposition to discuss our thinking on the recommendations. This has not happened. The Minister confirms today, and I quote, we are accepting the intent behind all 49 of Lord Etherton's recommendations. And the Right Honourable Member for Wyre and Preston North pointed out that the government may deliver a number of these recommendations in different ways from that described in the report, and the Minister's statement today has just not been clear on this. So we welcome progress on handing back medals, on an Armed Forces Veterans Badge and on a national memorial. We welcome the opening of registrations of interest for the restorative measures. But what action is he taking to ensure pensions are fully restored to those who were misinformed their pension rights have been abolished? What action is he taking to guarantee that those whose evidence of investigations was destroyed in 2010 so that they don't lose out? And on compensation, will he fully involve Fighting with Pride and other veterans groups in developing the scheme? Will he confirm that the scheme will make provision for the two main groups proposed by Fighting with Pride? Is the financial provision of £50 million in the MOD's budget for 2024, and when does he aim to open up the scheme? Mr. Speaker, we cannot change the past, but we can act to make amends. We can honour the service of our LGBT veterans. We can take pride in the inspiration they provide to future generations. This is what they and we across the House have the right to expect from government ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I just gently remind him it was this government that set up the Etherton Review, and it is this government that's carrying out the 49 recommendations. I'm proud of that. He needs to be very careful. Political parties shouldn't throw stones, and I think he would be the last one to try to make party political points out of this subject matter, and to a large extent I think we have resisted that. I said that a full debate would happen in the new year, but it has to have the advantage of, I think, something meaningful to debate, and that is the financial elements of this, which I perceive is the main point of likely controversy around this material. The honourable gentleman made it clear that we are in agreement all in agreement with the general thrust of this. So the controversy will be around how we structure the financial award. I expect in the new year to be in a much better place to bring to the House a suggestion around how we might do that, having consulted with others and observed from lessons of the past and also experience in other countries. However, the debate will not be confined to the finances, and I think that's implied in my use of the word full debate. I hope that's some reassurance to the honourable gentleman. On intent, we have discussed before other ways of delivering the same outcome to the satisfaction of veterans. For example, some veterans want a veterans badge. This is different from the existing veterans badge. Some do not. So we've designed a ribbon, which I have seen the prototype for, and which I think is a compromise. So that's an example of how we might do things differently to the ways described by Lord Etherton. Lord Etherton talks about relisting people on the Navy, Army and Air Force lists. Well, those lists don't exist in the way that they once did, but we can publish those names if people want them published. via the London Gazette. So that's a further example of doing the same thing, but in a different way. On pensions, because we've debated this before, when we last went round this particular boy in the summer, he will know that accrued pension rights remain. However, some people were misled when they left the armed forces, and I would strongly recommend that they refer to the guidance available on gov.uk. The LGBT Veteran Support and Next Steps page is very comprehensive and will take people through how they can apply for pensions if they're not currently drawing them. Destroyed documents, he will be aware, are impossible to rediscover. However, there are tags attached to most of them, which highlight the fact that